Welcome to A Williams Life. I'm your host, Gordon Earl. On this episode of A Williams Life, I'll be talking with Jackie Laughlin, who some of you might know from Williams by her married name, Jackie Meadows. Jackie has had a long and varied career, and one I would say that doesn't follow the traditional Williams path. After college, for example, and after receiving a master's degree in education from Howard University, Jackie embarked on a career in nursing where she specialized in serving as a midwife in various locations around the country. Jackie is also a trained archivist who has recorded many stories as part of what she calls her oral history collections, including some that she labeled Conversations with Wise Women. Additionally, she's a scholar, artist, poet, writer, and activist. We'll touch on all these aspects of Jackie's life, as well as her experience at Williams, where she was a student, wife, and young mother prior to graduation. Welcome, Jackie. There's a lot to talk about.
Thank you for having me.
You grew up in Harlem, and I want you to tell us about growing up in that part of New York City.
Well, Harlem is a name, but it's home. You think about Harlem Renaissance, you think about all the artists and poets and postal workers. It was a great place to grow up. I'm classic Northerner, classic native New Yorker. I was born and lived on 135th Street. And 135th Street is a prime territory. The Schomburg was there, the New York Library was there, Harlem Hospital was there. So all of the things that I later read about that were historical, I said, oh, that's my neighborhood. That's different. I went to Catholic school, a place called All Saints. I went to a Catholic nursing school run by some Black nuns there in Harlem. It was a good place to grow up and a good place to be a cosmopolitan citizen of the world and not knowing. I just thought that was normal. Everything was normal. Yeah. And then you move away and find out how different it is.
Now, your parents were both extraordinary in their own right, and I'd like you to tell me about them. Let's start with your dad.
Okay. Well, my dad was also born in New York City. His mom was from Trinidad. His father was from Jamaica, and they immigrated in the early 1900s. But my dad and his father were born here. My dad in 1916, his brother in 1915. And even though when I was preparing for this, I was looking at some pictures. I've been staying at my dad's apartment here in New York. And he grew up in, believe it or not, integrated schools in New York.
Way back then.
Way
Wow.
back then. And what we think of now as new, it's old stuff. It's old stuff. And New York was always a city of immigrants. And when I looked at the pictures, you can't tell it looking at somebody who's white or black, but clearly his junior high school photograph from Cooper and, his high school photos, there were black kids and kids from probably Poland and Germany and young immigrants that he went to school with those people. And then he went... I think what's interesting about my dad is that my dad probably always wanted to go to college. And when he graduated in high school, would be like 1930s or so, he and his brother both got accepted to Fisk University in Tennessee. And his father said, absolutely, you're not... Are you nuts? You're not going to Tennessee. You're going to work and get a job. And they always were angry at their dad. And I think that their dad realized that for them, kids, handsome boys growing up in New York City, Nashville probably was not the place for them.
There was still Jim Crow. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Beyond that.
Yeah.
and also culture. Musicians, artists, feeling in some ways very free, and going to the South is a very different lifestyle. But I wanted to share that story to say that they were angry at their father. They felt that their father was limiting them, not realizing later he probably saved their life. And my dad ended going up to New York University much later after meeting my mom, and got his degree there. He always majored in civics and government. He was a public school teacher. I think all Black people think that they're supposed to go into teaching. It's like embedded in your, learn one, teach one. So he worked at the post office, and he taught, and he played music on the weekends, and he taught kids music.
Well, tell me a little bit about your mom now.
My mom grew up in Washington, D.C. She was born and raised there, as was her mom. The connection to Williams, I think, is fascinating, is that my grandmother went to what was then M Street High School and then became Dunbar High School. So the track was, or the path, the legacy for Black students at Williams is that you had to be vetted. And so Williams had this long tradition shortly after the Civil War of going to certain places to vet the students. And Dunbar High School was one of maybe one or two secondary schools in the United States. And so they always took, not always, most years they took one or two Black students. Maximum was 3 from Dunbar High School. So my mom went to Dunbar, like her mom before her. And then she went to Howard, and she absolutely hated it. To her, it was like, why would I go to Howard? I've been at Dunbar. She had this vision. She wanted to be a fashion designer. She wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to be, a New York cool artist. And her parents thought she was absolutely nuts. She wanted to go to Vassar. She told me she wanted to go to Vassar, but she suffered through and went to NYU, and she got her bachelor's and her master's there. And when she met my dad had been a postal worker. He was a clerk in the post office. So when he met my mom had already had her degree, but her parents said she couldn't marry him because he was uneducated and he was West Indian. In their mind, he wasn't from a traditional...
He didn't measure up.
He didn't measure up. And my dad had been married before. That was the 3 strikes against him. And so he tells the story to my granddad that he said, if you'll give me a chance, I will show you. What is it that you like me to do? I want you to go to college. I want you to take care of your first family, take care of my daughter in ways that I think is appropriate. And we think that you should do better. So he credits my mother and her family for getting him to go back to school. And since my mother went to NYU, he said, well, GI Bill, I'll go to NYU. I will go to... So he got his master's and his undergraduate degree there, and kind of quickly left. At the time, postal workers, to be able to be out on the floor or at the window, even in New York, was unusual. And he went to management school, and, good government job went up. And back to my mother was very supportive of him having a career at the post office. And we always used to joke about, one day Daddy will have one job. And when he finally made some promotions, he came home and said that one job I'll make more money than I used to make at all 3.
Well, if I from our previous conversation, I know your dad was a lifelong postal worker.
Yes.
And I believe the first Black postmaster general in Manhattan.
He
right?
He was. That was what I was going to lead in. Talk about the timing. Postal work was considered to be initially a patronage job.
Right.
And that you could work at the post office, but to be in management didn't mean you went up through the ranks. So one of the things that happened during the what I'm going to call the civil rights era in the 60s is that my dad and 2 other postmasters were simultaneously appointed through this, I don't want to say patronage, you had to be Senate approved. So in L.A., Chicago, and in New York, they appointed 3 postmasters. So here was my dad, whose father had worked in the post office for over 40 years and also been a sleeping car porter, and didn't get to go to college, to have his son not only be the postmaster, but literally, if I took you to the post office downstairs, the Black people couldn't go up on the floor. They couldn't ride the elevator. My dad talked about older gentlemen weeping when they saw him get into the elevator and go up to the 3rd floor. Wow. So he was the first. The Postmaster General is a national position, and then each area is a locality. And now that we have zip codes, when my dad worked at the post office, there was no zip code, so he was one of the managers that introduced that. So he and the other 2 postmasters, the reason they did them 3 together was that they wanted the other Black people to see that there was a pathway up, but they also wanted people in high-level management positions to have support from other Black workers who had either gone through the ranks or I think the other Black person was that they had been in banking or some other management position, but they hadn't worked in a post office. So, yeah, that was significant. And that happened right before I came to Williams.
So let me ask you, both your parents are involved in education. They're educators.
Yes.
What influence did that have on you?
Well, it's like breathing. It's just, again, you don't know until later that that's unusual. But my parents were natural educators, I think. But I think in the Black community, especially, when the slaves were free, let's just focus on American history, less than 5% of the Black people could read and write. They were illiterate. Gordon, if you wanted to teach one of these kids, that you could be arrested. They could burn your house down.
Wow.
It's one of the things that I love about Williams, that so many people who were instrumental in developing public education, not just for Black students, but the entire nation, had this notion that not only education should be free, but that everybody should be educated. It shouldn't be just an elite society. So back to my parents, I think to say, even if you weren't a teacher, reading, being an educator was important. And this notion that if only 5% of the people could read, and a guy like Gordon, nice as he might be, would get in trouble for teaching me to read, that it's against the law. There's no schools, remember what I said before, 2 or 3 high schools in the entire nation that would admit Black students or have what we could think of as secondary education. I think that in addition to thinking that being a public school teacher was important, being an educator was important. Like my mom would teach, as a little girl, my mom would have people come over that were, now we think about adult education, imagine being 60 or 70 years old and you never learned to read. And this nice lady whose kids read, my mother would teach them to read. We always had books. We used to hang out at the library. I mean, imagine growing up across the street from the Schomburg Library. I didn't know it was normal, but that to them was a responsibility of being not just a school educator, but to function as an educator in the community. And if you told my mother you wanted to go to Mars and where would you study, you'd be in Mars next year. She would convince you as an educator. And I think the other thing that probably is different, especially when we were preparing for this podcast, my mother had a belief about young children. Even though our society said children should be seen and not heard, she never agreed with that. That little person over there, that little one, they have an opinion, they have an idea. They didn't consider it to be impolite. Now, we had very strict standards about how we were supposed to behave in public. But at home, we had a lot of conversations. What's your opinion? What do you think? You don't want to do anything that would embarrass your family nor the race.
Right.
And that to be educated and to be kind to the person that's collecting your trash, or you're not rude to someone that can't read, this notion that, yes, you are an elite person and you have skills that other people don't have.
But you're also an egalitarian.
You're egalitarian. And I didn't grow up people say religious. They had an attachment to their churches, but I had a very strong upbringing about what it meant to be a good person. Mr. So-and-so, like me calling a child to call someone by their first name, they're just eyeballs would roll back in their head. It's disrespectful. Whether you're selling something, picking up the garbage, everyone deserves to be treated with respect. And I think that's part of being an educator. Well,
yeah, it's funny you use the word a good person because I recently spoke at my son's wedding, and I said, I remember telling him when he was growing up that I wanted him to be a good person. That was it. There was no other lesson other than to be a good person, and he's become that person, which I'm very, very proud of. Let me ask you about something else and turn about your own education, because you attended Hunter College High School, which at the time was an all-girls school. And I read a quote about Hunter that said it was, quote, officially designated as a laboratory school for the education of intellectually gifted girls.
Aww,
do you agree with that description?
Well, sure. I went there. I didn't know that at the time, but then when I got there, that was the first time I didn't feel weird. People who had read as many books, or we were just weird girls. We were just weird, and I felt so at home there, and I didn't know that. And unlike my experience at Williams, which I know we'll get to later, you think everyone is like you. So when I get there, I meet all these girls from all over the city, just like I took the bus here to visit with you today. We take the bus, we take the train, their dads, cab drivers drop them off, and we all become little baby liberal artists, doctors, lawyers. And I think for many of the girls, and I think for me, this would have been the first or second generation for them, where girls were encouraged to be something not other than a mom or a wife, but that do you have interests that you would like to explore? Here's a place where we can help you do that. What you do with that after we leave you is, we don't know.
Well, it sounds as though, and sort of leading the question here, as though it really prepared you for Williams.
Yeah. And what it didn't prepare me for was what it was like to be somewhere where women weren't supported. For over 100 years, Williams tried to integrate women into Williams, and it wasn't very supported for a lot of reasons. One, that I think the young men that were there didn't think it would be, they couldn't have Williams and have girls there.
Right.
That just would not happen. But going back to my transition from being at an all-girls school, very cosmopolitan and diverse, to going to Williams, Williams didn't know what to do with us, and we didn't know what to do with Williams. So when I came to Williams, two other students, Nancy and Jean, who are in our class, came to Williams with me from Hunter.
Right.
Yeah.
You talk about the vetting process. Did you choose Williams, or did Williams choose you, or was it a combination of both?
Well, I'm going to say what I knew then and what I now, because I've talked to some of these people, I think it was mutual. I think I thought Williams would work for me, and I think I wanted what Williams had, not knowing what that was. But now that I've met Phil Smith and met more people who planned for women at Williams, I think that Williams wanted someone like me. And I'm going to use a word that I think is a little charged. We were an experiment, just like American experiment. We were an experiment.
By the way, that's a word I've talked to some of your Black classmates that they've used that on previous podcasts.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, they've used the word experiment as well, and now you're using it.
Yeah. Well, I think that people at Williams, people who planned for women to come, knew that it would be an experiment, because Williams and many, I'm going to use the word elite, they go into something thinking, we're going to be successful. I hope. I think, of course. But if you don't have a period of time where you back up and you say, oops, this experiment didn't work. The liberal artist, the scientific method tells you, well, if it didn't work, what did you learn about why it didn't work? They also didn't want the Williams women to be sacrificed, just like I don't think Williams wanted Black kids to be sacrificed, or a Latino kid, or somebody who'd never, maybe a student who's, if you were first, like they call, this makes me mad, we could talk about this later, we have non-traditional students at Williams. Like we just invented that name. I'm like, are you kidding me? We were non-traditional from 1700. It's just, how do you define non-traditional? So
I am a little curious in that you born and raised in Harlem, go to an all-girls, elite school, and then you go to the Berkshires, which is, in your own words, and you write this, was entering a...
Stop quoting what I say.
Well, I'm going to.
Oh, gosh. Be careful what you say.
So where you came from and where you're going to, in your own words, was entering a rural, white, male-dominated school. And it's so far from Harlem.
What was I thinking?
What were you thinking?
Well, I'm going to challenge you. I would say in some ways it wasn't that bizarre from where I came from.
Okay.
But because we don't know one another, like you and I are probably shared classes together, but we're getting to know each other in a way that we didn't know when we were both in school together. So the part about Williams that was different, I didn't know it was different until I went there. But the part about Williams that was the same, or like this cosmopolitan intellectual environment, was not that different. What I will say about the experiment and going to the Berkshires, and maybe I left this out about my parents. My mother was a Girl Scout leader, and I had always gone to camp, and I liked bugs and nature and camping, and we went camping. And if I had an interest, and my interest was in nature and being out in the natural environment, he felt, well, if you grow up in New York City, then you're going to need camp. So when I went to Williams, it allowed me to be in a different environment that I had grown up in, but it was one that I treasured and wanted.
Okay.
And when you say how the Berkshires is different, there's some people, if you're from a small town, why would you go to a small town? But if you're not from a small town, maybe it would be okay. And I'm gonna also say something that put up about the experiment. I had never lived in a small town before with a bunch of white people.
So you wanted to try something different.
Something new.
Yeah, something different. Okay.
And maybe that goes back to when you've heard my classmates say experiment. Some people don't want to be experimented on or be a part of an experiment. But some people welcome that idea, assuming that you're not using them as an experiment to harm them. We want to learn something from this experiment. So thank you. That's a helpful way for me to think about it.
I promise this is the last time I'll quote you.
Yeah. Don't be writing stuff down.
Well, actually, no, okay, I won't.
No, I'm teasing.
Okay, I'll paraphrase something, because I went back and I looked at a webinar that you did a couple of years ago, and you said that, I'll paraphrase it, being a woman may have been more significant than being Black at Williams. Explain that.
Oh, gosh. I did say that, and I feel that more strongly than ever. I mean, I had been Black my whole life. I popped out brown. I lived in a supportive Black environment. I didn't consider being Black a handicap. They teased me. I'd say, I'm unapologetically Black. That's, like before, people say, oh, Black is beautiful. And no, it's just part of who you are. And I would have to say that sexism, compounding racism, I just didn't have a freaking clue. I mean, when I say I was clueless and innocent, I don't think anyone prepared me for that. And so when I say the struggle or the difficulty that I had I been a Black man, I would have had certainly, what's harder than being a Black man in America? I'd say it's harder to be the mother of a Black man in America. Mm-hmm. My baby boy, my senior project, my Jordan, my monk, I embraced all the things about the divine feminine, but I didn't know that the world wasn't ready for me being this woman. My parents didn't prepare me for that. I think that going to a single-sex school where all these, I went to, the people that I went to school with, they're Supreme Court. They are not quiet, But I didn't know the world wasn't ready for that. And women who have ambitions were considered crazy or inappropriate or worse, enemies of their husbands in the culture. That if you wanted something better, not just for your children, but for other people's children, you would be harmed by that. And that you would have to make choices. You can have a husband or a partner and be a philanthropist or run a settlement house. You would have to make a choice. And I think that the idea of how gender and sexism functions in the world, that was the part that I was unprepared for.
And how did it play out at Williams?
It's still playing out at Williams. Mm-hmm. It's the experiment's not over, but I think for me it played out in good ways and bad ways. I think that I became a little bit of a wallflower. I pulled back, and I had to explore who I was, not just as a woman, but people had, I'm going to use the word stereotype. Oh, girls don't do that. What are you talking about, girls? Of course girls do that.
Especially if you're from Hunter.
Especially if you're from Hunter and you're from Harlem and your mother has already told you could do anything.
Yeah.
Like walk on water. So for someone else to tell you, someone in power, and I don't think that power just comes in the white male variety. That's another thing I probably will wish I didn't say. If another woman tells you, you can't do that, you're a bad mother or you're a bad wife, and the woman tells you that, or you come into conflict with other women because how you envision your life or what your life should look like, and they critique you, who are your role models? Mm-hmm. Whether it's, and we could pick a role model, but I didn't know the kind of Black woman that I wanted to become. I'm still discovering what that looks like. I'm still experimenting. When I had my son, September of my senior year, that probably was not the best plan ever, but having him there with the support system that I had as a woman, I think Williams women make the best mothers ever. But I didn't have a role model for that. So when you say when I use that quote about being a woman, I think my conflicts and difficulty that I had at Williams was around gender and sexuality, because I had never been in an environment where that had been so severely restricted or questioned. When I was out in the world and started to work, I think people reacted to me more as a woman than as a Black person. They knew it was impolite to say, Black girl, what are you doing here? No, girl.
Right.
I had a job interview. I won't mention where, because this person maybe still be alive, but he said to me, my son didn't get into Williams. We were 2 or 3 generations of going, what's so special about you, girl, that you went to Williams and my son didn't get in?
Wow.
How you start an interview like that?
Wow.
How really? I was I remember calling my dad and calling and saying, actually, my dad was already dead by then. Thank goodness he would have been horrified that I asked the question. But when I asked my mom said, "And your point? He's telling you about him, not telling you about you."
Right.
And he said, "Did you say something comforting?" I said, "I did, Mom." I said, "Mom, I have no idea." I said, "But I've been a smart girl my whole life, and I loved Williams, and I'm so sorry that your son didn't get in, but I'm sure he found a place that worked for him." Are you interested in hiring me or not?
That's a very compassionate response, but I imagine the initial second that you got that, you either felt shock or anger, but then you gathered yourself and you gave a compassionate response.
Gordon, you know what? You just said something that put the finger on it for me. I don't have the ability to always react how I first feel initially. That's what Black parents or progressive women teach your kids. Do you realize if I had said what I thought?
Yeah, you wouldn't have gotten the job.
Not only would I have not gotten the job, we wouldn't have had the transactional conversation that we needed to have. So the fact that you said, what was your initial action? Were you angry? I'm 71 years old and I'm still realizing, in that situation, a normal person would be angry.
Right.
And so I think that back to your question about being a woman or gender, what was difficult, I didn't know that I was angry, but I did know that if my mother and father were sitting in the room, how dare I get angry?
Right.
You are privileged. You don't have the right to get angry. Pay a therapist, tell your girlfriend, but this is not the place and time because what you're doing has repercussions and consequences, not just for you, but maybe for your gender, for your race. With this person that I did get hired with, I would have to go back to that person and advocate for my students.
Right. Let me just go back a couple of minutes and wind up on Williams before we go to your career, because I want to ask you about having this role of student, young wife, and mother all at the same time.
Yeah.
I thought about that. I said, I could barely cope with myself at Williams, and you had those roles. Just tell me a little bit about how you were able to juggle all that and work your way through your senior year.
Well, again, I'm going to be overly honest. I didn't think of myself as juggling at the time. Mm-hmm. Now, at 71, I look back and I go, I juggled. But at the time, I had a very supportive environment, self-selected. Like the people who didn't support me, just pretend they didn't exist on the planet because I only had eyes and room in my life for people who were supportive. So I had people who helped me with babysitting, who helped me with studying, who helped me because they knew that me being a good mom and a good wife was really not just important to me, but they wanted to see me succeed. And I wasn't afraid of my parents, but everybody knew, because my dad was the postmaster, that anything that I did would be a reflection on him. So back to juggling, I knew I had to set priorities. I had to go to class, had to feed my baby, had to eat, and
had to be a wife.
Yes, that was an important part, since he graduated from Rhode Island School of Design, and he apparently had promised my dad, or my dad threatened him. I still don't have the same story, that I could not live in sin, that I had to be married, and that he would. I mean, he left Rhode Island School of Design as a brilliant sculptor and moved to Williamstown to work in a lumber mill. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Come on. But it was a good experience for him. And today, the relationships that I have with staff at Williams now, they go, "You know about Potvin Lumber?" I go, "Yeah, my husband worked at Potvin Lumber." You know, so he made sacrifices to support me. And I think that the most important thing to me that senior year at Williams was graduating. I didn't have to get A's or B's, I had to graduate. I had to walk across the stage. My mother and father said, we're going to be in the front row. Are you going to be there? And I go like, sure. Oh my God. How is that going to happen? Well, you do that a day at a time. And then I think the other thing about juggling, and I hope you mention this, I mean, nursing my baby and being in a supportive environment is what every mom needs. And I had that from men and women, and that I'm not going to say I'm cheap, but why would I buy something if I had it for free? And why would I do something that would not be in my best interest? And so when I went to somebody and I said, Professor Harris, can you help me? Curtis Mann was the dean at the time. Can you help me? If you approach somebody and you say, can you help me? And the person says, I don't have a freaking clue, but yes, I want to help you. As opposed to saying, whoa, we don't do that here, or this has never been done, and what makes you think you can do that? That's the end of the conversation. So if there were someone who thought it was inappropriate for me to be married and have a baby, la, 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 I don't hear him, I don't see him, I rerouted my energy to my support system. And because I did that, I think I found those people, and those people rose up and helped me in ways that they didn't think was possible. But because I said, I got to pass this chemistry test. Could you help me? And I remember, I'm blanking on his name. He's still alive. I said to him, I don't know anything about carbons and chemistry. And he looked at me and he said, my baby was premature, and do you think you'd like to write a paper about prematurity and the chemistry of human lactation and breast milk? I said, what?
Sure.
Can you imagine? I still have these papers where I wrote about the chemistry of breastfeeding and nursing because this man said to me, why don't you give it a try? I'll help you with the carbons. You help me with what it's like to nursing a baby. So I can say that it's not that Williams was a bad place for me. If it was bad, I didn't pay it no mind because I had to graduate.
All right. Well, you just gave us the perfect segue to post-Williams.
Life after Williams.
Life after Williams, because you received a master's degree in education from Howard.
In counseling, yeah.
And then picking up on what you just said, later degrees and certificates in nursing.
Yeah.
And specializing in being a midwife. And I wonder why you chose that path.
The only way that I could be a midwife, if I wasn't going to be an underground Black midwife in South Carolina, delivering babies because nobody else would. There's nothing wrong with that. Those women, I honor those women. South Carolina and Mississippi and those places, they figured out how to do it without any help. But in order for me to go, Williams told me, who is doing what you want to do? Yale had a midwifery school. In order for me to get into midwifery school, I would have to be a registered nurse. In case you're wondering, Williams doesn't offer nursing.
Yeah.
And when I went to my dad, talk about support, I said, Dad, I think I want to be a nurse midwife. He said, well, why would you want to do a thing like that? You could be a doctor.
And what did you tell him?
I said, I don't want to. I could if I wanted to, but I don't want to. And he pulled the daddy gender thing. Well, I'm your father. You want me to write a check? I'm not writing a check for you to go. What is it? Nurse? What? He said, no, you want to go to medical school? I will make that happen for you. But if you want to be a nurse and you want to be a midwife, forget it. Just throw it out of your mind. I put up with this for long enough. So in order for me to be a midwife, especially if I was going to go to Yale, I had to be a nurse first. That's why I didn't go to law school, because I knew I wouldn't be happy as a lawyer.
But your dad wouldn't support that.
He absolutely didn't support it. And we had a big fight because I said, did you have a brain tumor and get sick so I wouldn't go to nursing school and midwifery school? He said, that's a callous, horrible thing to say. But he said, it's possible.
But I was going to ask a question earlier, another quote from you in which you talked about, liking to please your parents.
Oh, my God.
So here is an instance you have as your foundation to want to please your parents, and now you're doing something that he doesn't agree with and won't support.
Exactly.
So that must have been all kinds of conflicts
thank God
rising
for
up
therapists.
within you.
Yeah. And this is the white philanthropy, male gender thing that I probably need more therapy on this. He said to me, I won't pay for it. I paid for Williams. I'll pay for your kid to go to what private school? You want him to go to Montessori school? I'll pay for that. It's like what I call the power of the checkbook.
Right.
So at some point, a young person, male or female, says, I don't care how much money it is. I would rather be a starving artist than take another freaking dollar from you. It doesn't have to be a bad thing, but I think that parents and the public and power structures co-opt people by the checkbook. And I think was that my first time for infamy, rebellion? Absolutely. And my father was right. He said, why would you want to be this when you could be a doctor and I'll pay for it?
Because you don't want to be a doctor.
Because I don't want to be a doctor. And I think that, and again, because of what happened to me at Hunter and Williams and this model of education and preparing, I tell people now, you have alien babies. They're going to live in a world that you know nothing about. So when I tried to explain to my father that I could be a doctor, but I don't want to. I could be a lawyer. Daddy, I tried it. I think I would. He said, well, just take the LSAT. Just take the postal exam. And I go like, no, I'm busy. I don't want to. But I think that I was trying to explain to him that my theoretical model for what I wanted to be, I couldn't learn that in law school. It's like, you ever hear people say, well, your safety is being a lawyer? No, I think I'll go insane if I go to law school.
Did you heal that breach with your father over your careers?
Well, now I have. Spiritually, I have. But not before he died. Not that he was ashamed of me. I don't think he would describe it as shame. It was just like, you can't see us on the podcast, but just shaking my head. Why would she do that? Because she's making, like if my dad would say, being a doctor would be easier. Bad enough you married an artist that won't wear a tie. But you're taking a path that's unnecessarily rocky when I can offer you an easier path.
Right.
And so I'm staying at my dad's apartment here in New York. My dad made it possible for my brother and I to still have a place that we could stay. But my father died in 1982. I didn't become a midwife until 1987. So he was already dead. But he, again, he didn't have a brain tumor because it was inconvenient. But I did stop nursing school to help take care of my dad.
We talked about your mother and your father at the beginning of the broadcast and podcast, and you just talked about your father and the conflict you had with him. Where was your mother in all this?
My mother is, you want to walk on water, you want Mars, you got it. What my mother helped me to do was that it was time for me to confront my father. She said, he doesn't have to understand, but you need to tell him no. And
she was supportive of you.
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, she was supportive of me when I didn't know. Like if I brought you home, Ma, this is Gordon. And she says, well, he seems like a nice man. Well, does he like red sweaters or blue? My mother would knit you a sweater. What does he like to eat? Is he a vegetarian? Yeah, well, she wanted to accommodate. Well, she felt that her notion about accommodating and supporting people was really hurting her daughter. So she said, if you want to be a midwife and you want to go to nursing school, just tell your father. Well, he won't write a check. Well, she said, I'll talk to my lawyer about writing a check. But by then my parents were divorced. But she was just saying, my mother gave me the strength to say, you have to deal with conflict. And just because people don't know who you are, you have to know who you are. Right. So the midwifery, my mother had very severe postpartum depression. I mean, like go to hospital crazy postpartum depression. And she always felt that it was because she didn't have the supports that she needed. So she felt that she had to, like she would tell everybody, my daughter's breastfeeding, and my daughter is this, and my daughter is that. And da-da-da-da-da. She was my biggest cheerleader, though her experiences were really, she lacked the support. So she felt like she had to give me the support. And back to midwifery school, I think that my mother was proud of me. But I also think my mother didn't have a clue about what I was doing. Midwifery school was hard. Probably the hardest thing that I ever did. My mother was incredibly supportive. I wanted to work on talk about Indians and William. I wanted to work on an Indian reservation. And my mother, God love her, she said, Arizona, Indian reservation, rural America, are you sure? Mississippi, are you sure? If I had said yes, my mother would have supported me. But my mother said, there's some other place that you can be of public service that won't be so drastic for you. So, Indian Health Service, I mean, I was following in the path of William's people, but I didn't know it. And I didn't know that it was going to be as hard and there would be consequences, and that I don't put it this way. I don't have regrets, but I can see now how there were roadblocks that I didn't see coming, and I didn't plan. The way women say you have to marry well because you don't want to die poor with a cup in your hand. I don't know if you ever heard that statement before.
I have.
Okay. So if I had married well and married maybe the person that my father would have picked, or so that at 70 I wouldn't be worried about the stuff I'm worried about, that took me in another direction, but it also would have taken me away from where I am now.
Let me ask you something that has to really do with almost a philosophical question about life. You've talked about the struggles. You've talked about struggles with your dad and other struggles in terms of some racism and sexism and stuff like that. But when I've read your creative efforts, your poetry, your blogs and the like, what comes through is a sense of what I'm going to say almost unrelenting or ferocious optimism.
Aww.
Whether you're writing about your family, your friends, and I'm wondering, despite the struggles, which we've heard,
that I've minimized.
Where the optimism comes from? Is it your faith or your family? There's a core optimism that I sense. Am I right about that?
I think it snuck out a little bit. I'm definitely a glass half full kind of gal. Where does it come from? You've intimated at that question. Lots of therapists have, lots of friends have. I think that for me, it's not so much for other people. In order for me to cope, I have to be optimistic. Okay, that it's like I'm not helping you because I want to help you. I'm helping you because I feel better if I look at something optimistic. I have to be optimistic because that's how I handle adversity, by being optimistic. If you need encouragement, my mother would probably say, less so my father, though he would probably agree with my mother, that if you're in a difficult situation, you will best be served by encouraging yourself and encouraging the others around you. That's going to be your best shot for getting out of this. If you're mean, nasty, and you sink into despair, all will be lost.
You know, another way that I understand that you handle adversity is through prayer.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm wondering what that process is. For instance, you're facing a situation and you pray. Tell me about that process and what you get out of it.
Well, I didn't realize that I prayed my whole life until relatively recently, but now my prayer practice and my spiritual practices are really quite simple. I just pray every day, whether I need it or not. It's like I used to tell the really stinky homeless veteran, I take a bath once a week, whether I need it or not. You know, it's like there's some things that you do that prepare you for when things come up that are difficult. So my prayer practice really is about having this conversation, not with God that's like a white guy with long hair, but having a conversation, a daily practice where I go to my source. What makes me feel happy, joyous, feel full of love? And I do it on a regular basis. So when I have a really, really bad day or something bad happens, like right now I'm really into being a grandmother. If something bad happens to one of my 5 grandchildren, I have shifted from the idea that I'm a magical person with a magic wand that I can fix it or write a check, to seeing them doing well and being connected to a source of which optimism and ascending, seeing the view from a different perspective that allows them to get through. So if I do that on a daily basis, I'm better prepared to deal with not just adversity of any kind, but that spiritual practice allows me to be a much happier camper than I would otherwise be.
Now, people think of prayer as praying to God. You don't pray to God. Who do you pray to, or what do you pray? How does that work?
Okay, so for me, prayer is a conversation. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I have a prayer group, and they would joke, if they were here, they say, she prays. I rarely see God as a person, but if God was a person, it would be a baby. The person that I would envision is not like an old white guy or even an old lady. I see a baby. Mm-hmm. I see graciousness. I see something that makes me feel love or happiness or passion or joy, creativity. I think offering people opportunities to create, whether you're 3 or 83, is a form of prayer. I would also argue that
is prayer. It sounds like prayer is sort of a conversation. With yourself.
With yourself or source. What do you believe is the source of goodness in the world? What does that look like? And how do you get in touch with that? Did you do something fun today? You know, we plan a day, we block out time, but where's the fun and the passion? Where's the joy? When were you not just nice to somebody else, but when were you nice to yourself that you experienced that? So for some people,
to love yourself.
Yeah. But culturally we're taught that loving yourself is selfish. What if when you're feeling calm and at ease, you're less likely to cause havoc in the world? And when you have been deprived of having that experience, you don't know what it feels like or you don't trust it. So if prayer is a conversation, an invitation to that, once a day, take a bath whether you need it or not, then it's easier to slip into it when somebody does something really horrible to you. Or before I realized that prayer was a practice that I had done my whole life, taught to me by the people that were around me. I just thought it was like a weird thing. I thought it was a weird thing that I did. But as I got older, I realized this is what this looks like. This is when someone gets, like my parents didn't believe in spanking. Okay, that'll give you that. They didn't believe in TV and they didn't believe in spanking. Well, if you meet somebody and they says, well, the only way you can get a child to do something is hit him. You got to hit him.
Yeah.
So if you don't have this experience of, I used to talk about midwifery. I used to run a child abuse program, and I met all these women, mostly black, but, white too. And they said, how do you get somebody to do something with hitting them? It was good. It was good for my mother, and it's good enough for me. You're getting ready to lose custody of your child. Let's rework this. Most of those women and men, I would say without exception, 90% of them had been abused or neglected horrifically as children. They thought that was normal. But this is what's more important. They had never seen someone interact with a little one with a different style. They would sit there and they'd go, wow. Wow. But what I'm telling you is that I didn't know that. But because I had had the experience of being loved and not neglected, they could watch me. They could see someone that represented them and say, oh, you mean you could get your wife to do something without hitting her? Absolutely. Mm. It can work, even for you. But you have to, it's not necessarily an intellectual process. It is a process that you experience by being a witness. So going back to prayer, I can tell you, I have to say my prayer practice has really blossomed over the last 10 years. And I can say not only am I a better person, I'm a happier person because I have a go-to place. And like I said, mostly it's not a guy, but when I really struggle, it's like, people say, oh, I can pray to a tree, I can pray to a frog. I could pull it off. I think it's pretty funny. But when I'm really in a desperate place, I see a baby. Eye contact, looking at me, longing for attention.
It's funny because I know you love your son and you talked about him as a child and, being a midwife and a nurse, that allusion to a child makes perfect sense. Let me give you an observation on my own life. I have a very good friend, a Williams alum, who's going through a very difficult health crisis right now. Mm-hmm. And his wife will say, pray for us or offer your prayers. And I'm not sure how to respond because I'm not sure how much I believe in the power of prayer.
Exactly.
And it's like, how do I best support my friend? And I don't know whether, in your view, this is a form of prayer, but the best way I can think of is to let him know, A, I'm thinking about him through his journey, and B, I love him. I don't know, you consider that prayer, but that's the best I've come up with.
That covers it for me. And the thing that I would add to that I would want to honor in you, if someone says to you, will you pray for me? Then to be able to say, well, me in prayer is a little rusty. However, the ability to show up, just be present. Is there something that I can do? Or this is something that I can do? Not that the person has to tell you, but in silence, for them to have that experience of not being alone.
I want to fast forward to June of this year, which is our 50th reunion.
Yes.
I read a long essay that you put together that said encouraging people to go back because of the connections that they'll make. And I'm wondering what kind of connections you're looking to make when we get together in June.
What I'm looking forward to is much like this conversation. Even though you and I were probably in class together, it took us 50 years to wind back. Right. So in June, the fact that I've saved my money, I'm going to go back, I'm going to allow myself a week, I'm going to open myself to meeting up with people and to have experiences, reflections that I couldn't have had because I was busy when we were at school before. And when we're at this point in the American experiment, some of us, if we don't act now in a way that is for the good, it's not that it'll be forgotten, but that we will have missed an opportunity that we could have easily done. So, June, if you can come, I would like you to come. If you can't come, is there something that we can do for you, your classmates, that will help you to make sense of something that happened 50 years ago or 50 years ahead?
Yeah, I think
that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, and for me, when I think about my Williams experience, the thing that is most important is the friends that I had from Williams. And in terms of reunions, it's connecting with old friends, but especially doing this podcast, talking with you and others. I've made reconnections that I wouldn't otherwise have made.
Yeah.
So it's the new connections as well as the old connections, which are part of this process of Williams' life and part of reunion that are most special for me.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one other thing, because, again, this is the last time I'll quote from your writing. Not quote from your writings. It's just that when you graduated, you did not return to Williams for many years.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why you stayed away for so long now that you're such a proponent for coming back and enjoying the Williams experience.
I'm feeling like I'm being overly exposed, too vulnerable. I think that my delay in coming back was a good thing. I think that the reason I came back, and I think the letter that you're talking about, is that I said, why did I come? Because you asked me. You reached out and you asked me.
The college you're talking about.
Well, actually, I'm talking about a person.
Okay.
The college is not the college.
Right.
The college is a person. We have a 200-year experience. Like, I'm studying right now a guy named Calvin Dufresne, and Calvin said, we will be known by our graduates, but we will be known by our relationships. So if Calvin in 1821 called me or wrote me a letter and said, Jackie, I'm wondering how you're doing, it's because somebody called me and said, I wonder how you're doing. Can you help me? Can you help a sister out? Can you come do this? Or I want you to do something. So that means that I'm not saying yes or no. I'm saying yes or no to a person. But what I will say for me is that I didn't know that it would benefit me. Selfish me. I would be better because it would help me to understand what happened to me in a way that I didn't understand before. So that's why I want to encourage people to come back if they can. But if they can't come back, and there are a lot of good reasons why people can't come back or don't want to come back, or they're still too traumatized, what can I do as someone who was intimately changed by a shared experience that we have? So if you can't come to Williams, whether it's too expensive or you don't want to, or there's not enough therapy in the world to help you, I can still do something for you that will help me, and it will help both of us because we'll have a different perspective on our time together. I know the pregnant pause that I want to say here is that you can't know that in advance. It is only the after experience. So one of the things that I have said to alumni engagement is if we make a commitment to contact everyone and just offer them the olive branch, the peace branch, I'm thinking about you. There are guys that I know that I was very close to in Williams that I haven't seen in 50 years, or who befriended my husband, or who watched my baby when I was in psych class, titty milk leaking, and they were out there watching my baby. If I don't call them between now and June and say, I was thinking about you, and I know you don't want to come, but I just want you to know that you came up on my mind, and I really appreciate thinking about the fact that I probably wouldn't have graduated had you not done that.
Yeah, I think that what you made a very important point, that the connections that we have, we'll have those connections at reunion, but we also have them outside of reunion. And those are new relationships. I just struck up a relationship with one of my classmates. I don't know if he'll be back at reunion or not, but we have established a relationship, as I have with others, and that's a continuum. It's ongoing, and I think it's beneficial for a lot of Williams alumni.
Yeah. Personally, you're right. It's personally beneficial, but you would be the one to determine, not me determine. You would be able to determine how it would benefit you. But I want to say our conversation here allows us to rethink experiences that we have while we're still alive, and to rethink about, is there something that we can do that will make our lives better, make the world a better place, or even more so, what can we do to make Williams be better so that we have the education, other people had the education we had that won't be there without our support.
Well, listen, on that note, I want to thank you for being here. I look forward to talking with you at reunion and with others and having the kind of conversations we talked about. So thank you for being part of A Williams Life.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it, and I'll see you in June.
For our listeners, you can see photos of Jackie's life on our website, 75creates.com. You can also listen to earlier episodes and view related materials there. If you like this episode, please share it with a classmate, friend, or family member who might enjoy it. Until next time, this is Gordon Earl. Thank you all for listening.